Yes guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am in Middlesbrough. I've been told that G4S are leaving data lying around. For a start, they're not supposed to be holding job centre data. It's not part of their contract. G4S are not allowed to hold information about claimants, appointments or anything like that. So we're gonna have a look around and see if we can see anything that we shouldn't.
This is Street Video Reviewer. Thank you for tuning in. The auditor is called Eye Spy Audit. He has quite a sizable channel, just over 11,000 subscribers, and this video of his has had 28,000 views so far. And the follow-up video that he did, that I'll also be covering, has more than 11,000 views so far. You could say this is an up-and-coming auditor. Anyway, it's nice of him to check for us G4S's compliance with the GDPR and the Data Protection Act, and I'm going to assume that he is correct in what he says about the contractual limitations on G4S, but with one caveat. The necessary caveat is that if G4S are responsible for building security, then regardless of what their contract with the DWP may or may not say, it's likely that they will be collecting personal data on visitors to the job centre.
Are they holding data?
There is a particular sensitivity concerning job centres because for some years now they have been merged with the DWP, which means people attending may be people looking for work, but more likely are people claiming benefits. In the past, all sorts of people went to job centres, not just people claiming. So being seen there just meant you were looking for work. It didn't necessarily mean you were also claiming benefits. I would expect that at a job centre, a G4S officer will typically handle signing in and signing out, which will be recorded manually on an attendance sheet. The information collected at that point could be sensitive because it will be clear with whom the visitor has an appointment, and if it's a work coach, then that means it has been disclosed to a third party, in this case a G4S officer, that the individual most likely is claiming benefits. Now, strictly speaking, this is not personal data because it's not in electronic form. The attendance sheet is just a piece of paper, and it is not disclosable information under the Freedom of Information Act, so it doesn't fall within what we would call other general processing under Chapter 3 of Part 2 of the Data Protection Act, which is a technical point we don't need to go into. But the point is, as a result of that, the protection for this information, this manual information on the attendance sheet, will not be under the Data Protection Act. It will be in contract law and what is known as tort, which is the law of civil wrongs, which says that there is an enforceable duty on G4S and its agents and staff not to misuse private information. I would expect that in the contract between G4S and the DWP, there will be a provision stating that G4S and its employees and agents cannot disclose information revealed during their duties. And as I say, there is also a duty in general civil law not to misuse such information. The attendance sheet belongs to the job centre, so the scope for a data breach in reality is limited to the possibility of either the G4S officer being indiscreet and gossiping to somebody, or another visitor to the job centre seeing a name he or she recognises on the document if it's displayed in that way. The other category of personal data that a G4S officer would handle is any digital capture of people's faces on a body-worn camera or on CCTV if G4S are manning the CCTV at that particular job centre as well as the building security. That data would come under what is called the General Processing Provisions in Part 2 of the Data Protection Act. And the processing would be for the purpose of site security and law enforcement. Law enforcement purposes could potentially extend into measures to tackle benefit fraud, which means that potentially G4S could pass this personal data to the DWP or some other public body responsible for criminal investigation. But that is probably the extent of the data sharing. And data for criminal investigation and law enforcement then falls under an entirely different section of the Data Protection Act. But we don't need to go into that. What all that means is that G4S would be obliged to discard this data after a due period of time, as they would have no proper use for it. Probably they would keep it for 6 months or so. Now that I've explained all that, let's go back to the auditor.
Cheers.
Hello, buddy.
Nothing there.
You alright?
Hello, you alright?
Yeah, you can't record in government property, mate.
Public you were going to say, weren't you?
No, government property, I said.
Government?
Yeah.
Who owns it though?
Sorry, I'll put my camera on. Just so you're recording me, I'll record you.
In terms of trespass law, there is no such thing as public property as such. A job centre is private property owned by the state, typically the DWP. The first question is the auditor trespassing at this point? It's not typical for somebody to walk into a job centre filming, especially if he doesn't have an appointment. We didn't get a good view of the entrance, so we don't know if there were any signs there at the time of this encounter that prohibited filming. The policy of job centres is that filming is only permitted with the consent of the job centre, and this includes both claimants and others with an appointment, and anyone coming in without an appointment. Now, if somebody has a valid journalistic purpose for being there, this could potentially be a defence from an action for trespass under what is known as Article 10 of the Schedule to the Human Rights Act, which protects the right to freedom of expression. More importantly, Article 10 is also a potential basis for a formal request to film, which the auditor could have put to the job centre or the DWP at any time. The auditor has said that he is investigating privacy in job centres. I have already explained at length that G4S will handle personal data at job centres, whatever the contract with the DWP may say. That data handling is limited, however, and controlled, and probably is accounted for in the contract between G4S and the DWP. There is nothing for the auditor to investigate, and I find that a bit ironic given that he walks in with a camera, not understanding that people in a job centre will not typically want to be filmed there. He doesn't seem to grasp that G4S, the DWP and the job centre have duties to guard the privacy and confidentiality of service users and indeed staff, and this itself stems in part from the Human Rights Act. Article 8 to the schedule enshrines the right to respect for your private life. The rights of journalists need to be weighed against this because the rights in Article 10 are not absolute. They are subject to law. Indeed, the DWP has a personal information charter, which I link to in the description. Nevertheless, whether there really is something worthwhile to investigate is beside the point. The auditor could state to the G4S officer a journalistic justification in being there, which at the very least would complicate the situation for G4S. Let us give the auditor the benefit of a doubt and we'll pretend. We'll pretend and say that he may have some journalistic justification for being there and is availed of the rights in Article 10, so he is not trespassing at this point. He has now been told that he can't film. Let's see what happens.
So you're not
I'm going to
allowed,
ask you to leave the building as well.
so you're not allowed cameras, but you've got one?
I can, yeah. For my protection and the government property. So you can leave.
I'll just come and have a look at the leaflets.
You can turn that off. I'll let you know.
He has been told twice to leave. The security officer is filming for security reasons. The occupier of the land, the DWP, is allowed to do this as it's their land. I mentioned just now the possibility, I think it's a remote possibility, that the auditor has a valid and defendable purpose for being there, which is journalism. Now is the time to mention it, so let's see if he does.
You turn yours off.
I'll turn mine off when you turn yours. So leave properly.
I can't turn mine off, no.
Well, you can leave the property then, can't you?
Don't sit so close.
I'm not touching you.
Stand back.
I'll open the door for you. Yeah,
Oh.
come on.
No, you're okay.
You can go now.
I'll come to have a look at the signage.
Right, that's it. Turn that off and you can come and have a look.
Step back.
Leave the property.
Don't be so aggressive.
Just leave the property. You can't record me, I've just told you that. I've explained it, I'm not going to explain it again.
Right.
So you can leave now. Yeah?
I haven't finished what I've come for.
Oh, Duffy.
Right, so now will you state what you are there for?
The only pit. Yeah, my camera's recording.
You've been told to leave.
I've only came down to look at the signage.
Yeah, without the camera.
He's saying he's there to look at the signage. I'm confused now. I thought he was there for a journalistic purpose. Maybe he thinks he's working undercover, but he isn't filming covertly. We know that because the G4S officer has noticed a camera, which can clearly be seen. It's also quite likely that this auditor is wearing a mask. The bottom line is that if he is acting on a journalistic purpose, then he now has to state this, and on that basis attempt to persuade the G4S officer that his Article 10 rights should be balanced against the duties of G4S and the DWP to guard the privacy and confidentiality of service users, and on that basis he can continue filming. If he is not willing to have that dialogue with the G4S officer and potentially a manager in the job centre, or if he did and the permission to film was denied, then he could still continue his journalistic visit without filming. He should address all this with the G4S officers now and mention his Article 10 rights and say he is collecting information for a story or video or whatever.
No.
You've got your camera on?
I've got my camera on for protection.
From me? You don't need that.
You're not allowed to film in this building, it's a public building. It's not allowed. It's against the law.
The lady's statement that the auditor is acting against the law is getting more to the nub of things. There are 3 questions to address here. First, is filming on private land without permission against the law? Second, regardless of whether filming is against the law, by continuing to film, is the auditor now committing an offence anyway? Third, if neither of these things suggest that the law has been broken, then what, if anything, is the auditor doing wrong? In answer to the first question, filming without permission on private land is usually not in and of itself against the law. However, there are 2 situations where it might be. The first is in a restricted area, such as a prison. A prison is private land, again owned by a public body or a private prison contractor. That is not of relevance here because there is no statutory protection of that kind for DWP premises. The second situation, which is of more relevance here, is when the filming involves the capture of personal data, in circumstances where the person doing the filming is acting unlawfully and does not have the consent of a data controller. That is the offence of unlawful obtaining of personal data contrary to Section 170 of the Data Protection Act 2018. Parliament intended that the Section 170 offence would be to deal with unlawful data leaks, but there is nothing in that section that precludes the application of the offence to broader circumstances. Let's say someone is trespassing, which is an unlawful act, and in the process of doing so, that person captures personal data and makes use of it. These actions have all the ingredients of an offence under Section 170. It's the same principle as leaking information. Privacy has been compromised and the data has been shared without the consent of a local data controller. In this incident, the auditor is capturing the faces of the G4S security officers. This is personal data. However, in this case, I don't believe that Section 170 applies. The reason is that the data is captured in a context in which it does not compromise the privacy of the security officers, as they are most probably stood in an area from which they can be observed by the public. That brings us to the second question. Is he breaking the law by continuing to film? The offence I have in mind here is aggravated trespass, contrary to Section 68. Again, I don't believe the requirements for aggravated trespass are met in this case. The auditor is not actually obstructing or disrupting the work of a job centre. He has had no contact with the job centre staff, only with G4S security officers, and it is their job to deal with this. Another point in the auditor's favour is that he is also being polite and calm and not causing too much of a scene. Therefore, it is unlikely his actions can amount to intimidation, another potential ingredient of the Section 68 offence. My conclusion then is that the auditor is probably not acting against the criminal law, but this is only based on the edited footage of the auditor has decided we can see. A job centre is a sensitive area in which people do not want to be filmed, and by entering the job centre while carrying a camera and clearly filming, it may well be that the auditor has intimidated service users and staff, and we just can't surmise from the footage that we can see whether this occurred. I have no sympathy for the auditor. He is now trespassing because he has been asked to leave and told to leave or stop filming, and he has done neither. He shows no understanding of the law or the principles of data protection and privacy that he claims to be so concerned about. He's not there for any reason or justification that may excuse or condone a trespass. He has deliberately engineered this confrontation, so in answer to the third question, what he is doing is trespass. It is simple trespass, a civil wrong, which is serious enough on its own. At this point, having asked him to leave, told him to leave, the security officers will be well within their rights to warn the auditor that unless he leaves, he will be ejected by force.
Against the law? What law is that?
I won't tell you again, you've been
No,
asked to leave.
there's no law.
I think you're wrong about that. As I've explained, there is a law of trespass. You're trespassing.
So what's over here?
Are you going
You
to
can't,
leave?
I was going to say, you're not going to
No,
walk
you're not.
anywhere
You're
forever.
not.
Because I'll just stand in the way you walk into me.
Stand back.
I won't.
Don't be so aggressive.
I won't.
Absolutely not.
So you've been asked to leave by myself, by my colleague. Now you're going to leave. Otherwise the police will be called.
Step back.
I don't want you recording me.
You've been asked to leave.
Step back.
I won't.
I only came down to look at the signage.
You can, yeah. Once you turn your camera off.
Don't touch me.
I'm not touching you. Nowhere near you.
You are.
No, I'm not. Nowhere near you.
My colleague is using reasonable force and he's asked you to leave.
I haven't finished what I've came for.
Turn the camera
record.
off and you can talk to someone.
I don't want you recording me.
You came up to me though. First of all, I was looking at these.
I'm protecting the property.
So I didn't come over to you.
Shouldn't be recording inside. Like you've been asked.
I'm going to call the police. I'm now warning you that I'm calling the police because you are committing it.
Right, you can do that.
Just to be clear, although I disagree with that lady officer on the law, as I think no offence has been committed, in a situation of this kind, it is reasonable for the G4S officers to call the police and ask for police attendance in order to prevent a breach of the peace. It should be remembered that although the police are primarily associated with the enforcement of criminal law and investigation of crime, they have a broader civil role of keeping the peace. There does not have to be a crime as such for the police to be involved, so I see no issue with what that lady is now doing.
And you can leave as well.
I haven't finished what I came for.
I don't care what you've come for. No bothered.
Someone's told me that G4S is having personal data, which isn't allowed.
Finally, he has declared why he is there. However, there is no obligation on the G4S officer to allow this auditor to film his visit to the job centre. As explained, any Article 10 rights the auditor may have are not absolute, are subject to law and have to be balanced against the duties of privacy and confidentiality that G4S and the DWP have to service users. On that basis, and in view of how the encounter has unfolded, the G4S officer would surely be correct to maintain a refusal and furthermore refuse to forward the request to the job centre management. It may have been different if had the auditor approached the job centre in a different way, in a more professional way. I note again the irony that he shows no concern for the protection of other people's personal data while claiming that he is investigating how G4S handle data.
G4S do not touch any personal data inside a building. We're your guard.
What's that on the desk door that's now gone?
Don't know. You've come to look at posters, you've just said.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with us.
What he is referring to there is the attendance book. As I've explained, it's routine for G4S officers to man the attendance book, and the privacy of service users who are entered in that book will be addressed in the contract between the DWP and G4S, and is also protected in civil law under the tort of misuse of private information.
Police are being called. I've just had confirmation you are not allowed to film in this building.
From who? From who?
She doesn't want you recording your name.
From the manager of the building, who is now calling the police because you do not have the right to film in this building.
Right, well, I'll speak to the manager then.
No, you won't.
You won't. You'll turn that off and you'll leave.
I won't be leaving. If you've called the police, I'll stay.
Fine.
The police will just remove you.
They won't.
Yes, they will.
They
You're
won't.
inside a government property.
They won't.
Video.
They won't.
I wonder. Alright. I bet you they're telling you they do. Don't touch me.
You touched me first.
No, you touch me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not to my camera, so I don't to yours.
I don't want to see you.
And you hit me first.
I didn't touch you.
You did.
I didn't like.
You did.
It's all on camera.
I did exactly
It's
the
all
same
on
as
camera,
what
and I've got cameras above me as well.
I did the same as what you did. You
You go
touched
through that door
and you
anyway.
touched me.
You're going out that door. You're not moving from that corner. Simple.
I did the same. I'm not. I'm
not bothered.
What? I'm not leaving this
not
corner.
bothered.
I am.
You're not leaving the corner. You're not accessing no more this building. Simple as that.
So you're imprisoning me.
I'm not. No. That door's open. That door's wide open. That door is wide open. You can leave anytime you want.
This is a public place.
Open that door properly there, fella. You do that. Middle button. Yeah.
We can use reasonable force. Leave.
There is a warning of reasonable force.
Just leave.
Just press that middle button. So
Can I speak to the manager?
No, you can't.
No, you can't. The manager's talking to the police, and we can use reasonable force.
So
We
you,
don't
Well,
want
you can leave on your own.
Will I wait for the police then?
Right,
You'll
wait
leave.
for the
You'll wait
police
outside.
Have you got the manager?
She's
Middle
on the
button.
phone to the
Top middle button.
police.
Yeah, press and hold that.
All of this just for a camera.
Yeah, because you're not allowed.
You're not allowed. There's a lot
So
of
we'll just
public
look-
data on showing
Exactly.
you, and you're
For
not
taking pictures of a sign.
Yeah. Yeah, just rush him out. Yeah, mate.
Whoa! What?
You're not getting back in.
What the hell was that
Walk away.
for?
Didn't listen to the first time, get out.
What was that for?
Because I did it. Invading in a government property. Got warned many times, police have been wrong.
If the police.
The force used was sufficient to remove the auditor from the premises. It was well within the law. There is some further interaction in the video, but that essentially is the end of the incident.
Come on, I'll wait.
Yeah, you'll wait.
You're going to lose your job for that.
Right, go away. Don't even.
You're going to lose your job for that.
He wants them to lose their jobs. This is a horrible man who engineered the situation walking around a job centre, a sensitive area with a camera without any consultation, and he was asked to leave, told to leave, given full opportunity to leave. It's disgusting. Unfortunately, it's not a happy ending because we see from a follow-up video made by this auditor that G4S seemed to have given in after the auditor complained.
Yes, guys, and welcome back. Today we are back in Middlesbrough, just outside Teesside Court, but we are not here for these guys. We are back at Middlesbrough Job Centre.
He goes back to the job centre to hand them a G4S document.
We are here to give them a present. Officer guidance for filming inside or outside DWP premise. If you haven't seen my video already, I've put a link to it below, and it'll be a little bit more relevant of why I'm back here. So if we flick to page number 9 of a 16-page document, by the way, physical contact should never be made unless in self-defence.
That is a general policy document internal to G4S, setting out how G4S management would ideally like their officers to carry out their duties. It doesn't change the position in law, which I've explained, and a general policy document cannot account for specific situations such as this one, in which you were trying to walk further into the job centre, you were filming and you were refusing to leave. We're still left with the truth, which is that you were trespassing and the G4S officers acted within the law in ejecting you from the premises.
Now, that definitely wasn't the case on my video, but I can't believe they've made a 16-page document for it. Unbelievable. Goes to show they haven't read it, so we are here to give them.
We don't know whether they'd read it or not, and even if they had, it was still open to them to act in this way. They can't just obey a policy document written by somebody who isn't even there.
See if they'll take it. I have been advised the people involved in that video don't work there no more, so I also have to double check if that is also correct. So let's go and give them.
It appears that he has received this notification from G4S themselves. If that's the case, then it's disappointing that they have failed to stand by their officers. This highlights a tendency sometimes for large companies to throw their own staff under the bus. It doesn't change what we saw in the video I've been commenting on, and it only serves to confirm how nasty this auditor is. He's just somebody, like most of these auditors, who delights in getting innocent staff into trouble and putting people out of work and out of their livelihood for doing no wrong. You can watch the rest of it yourself if you want to. He just goes to the job centre and hands that booklet to staff. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I don't condone violence, but I think I'd be lying to you if I didn't admit that there is something very satisfying about watching someone who deserves it being on the receiving end. Auditors like to mock and insult G4S officers and act like they're superior and that G4S officers are just thick and stupid. In this video we saw a G4S officer give an auditor what he deserves while acting entirely within the law. Thanks for watching.